Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Dan Rundy. I hold the Schreier Chair here at CSIS. I also lead the Americas Program. Thank you for joining us today for this event, Haiti in Crisis. What role can the international community play? Before we formally begin, let's take care of some logistics. This event will last approximately 60 minutes. Following the panelists' remarks and a moderated discussion, we will respond to questions from the audience. We ask our audience to please submit questions by clicking on the Ask Live Questions button on the event webpage. So again, everybody, good afternoon. I'd like to start by saying that Haiti and Haitians are very resilient. 217 years ago, Haiti became the first country in the Caribbean and the second country in the Western Hemisphere to gain independence from European colonial powers, overcoming centuries of oppression and serving as an immediate inspiration for other countries in the region. Over the past 2 centuries, Haiti has built deep cultural, social, and economic ties throughout the region and the world. Haiti, however, has also faced many challenges in its history. Haiti's geographic vulnerability, given its location within the Caribbean Sea, means this island nation is regularly affected by hurricanes and earthquakes. Perhaps the most infamous of these disasters in recent history is the 2010 earthquake that killed an estimated 200,000 Haitians and displaced around 1.5 million people. Haiti's harsh environmental realities were compounded recently by political disaster as decades of political frustration and violence came to a head with the assassination of President Moïse on July 7th of this year. In the 2 months following his terrible assassination, Haiti has also suffered a 7.1 magnitude earthquake and weathered Tropical Storm Grace. The combination of the disasters and the challenges of an interim government and the quick succession of these disasters have complicated relief efforts in an already complex situation. Without a doubt, there's an urgency to stabilize the country. Today, we have a distinguished panel of guests, and we want to address the role that the international community can play in supporting Haiti and to bolster relief efforts. Our panelists will provide specific, timely, realistic recommendations for the international community to contribute to improve security, stability, and resilience in the long term, while prioritizing medical, food security, and logistical assistance in the short term. We have a great panel today. Each has deep personal and professional connections to Haiti. Our first panelist is Ms. Jacqueline Charles. Ms. Charles is an Emmy Award-winning journalist with over a decade of experience reporting on the English-speaking Caribbean for the Miami Herald. Ms. Charles was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for her coverage of Haiti's 2010 earthquake and was awarded the 2018 Maria Morris Cabot Prize, the most prestigious award for coverage of the Americas. We are so pleased to have her with us today. Our second panelist is my friend, Ambassador Pam White. Ambassador White served as the U.S. Ambassador to Haiti from 2012 to 2015 and previously worked for USAID in Haiti and in several countries in Africa. Ambassador White had a wonderful career in international development and diplomacy, and I'm so grateful that she's made time for this. Our third panelist is Danielle Saint-Lo, founder of the Danielle Saint-Lo Haiti Women's Foundation. Ambassador Saint-Lo is also Haiti's Ambassador at Large for Women's Empowerment and previously served as the Executive Director of Haiti's Chamber of Commerce and Industry and as Haiti's Minister of Commerce, Industry, and Tourism. It's a wonderful pleasure to have Ambassador St. Lo with us today. So, Ms. Charles, let me get started with you and let me turn the floor over to you. Please, I'm so happy you're with us.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm going to just start my comments by taking us back 11 years to the 2010 earthquake, since we're talking about the international community in respect to the current disaster. And I think that we need to be reminded of that disaster and some of the promises, or as I wrote last year, the unkept promises, a decade of aftershocks and unkept promises at the Miami Herald, where we examine, that particular earthquake in 2010, it lasted 35 seconds. And according to the Haitian government, the death toll was 316,000 and up 1.5 million who were displaced, who were also injured. But we also saw over 400,000 homes and buildings that basically crumbled. And initially, the narrative with this current disaster on August 14th was that, visually it wasn't as bad as 2010. But I will tell you, after spending several weeks in the South after the August 14th quake, this quake is so much more challenging in other ways. It's widespread. There are towns that have been completely destroyed. One of the things that we have not heard to come out of the international community this time around is the promises of the aid. We're not hearing about billions of dollars that is going to go toward Haiti to help with its reconstruction. And I just want to remind folks that in 2010, and this is based on an analysis that Paul Farmer's office did at the UN, there was $10.37 billion pledge. And the analysis that Farmer's office showed was that more than half, 6.43 billion of the pledges committed for humanitarian and recovery assistance, it was dispersed. This included direct budget support from a few countries to the Haitian government, but less than 10% of that $6.43 billion went directly to the Haitian government. So that challenges the narratives that a lot of people had and continue to have, that the Haitian government received billions of dollars from the international community after the quake, and what did they do with it? Well, less than 10%. And just 0.6% of the pledges went to Haitian businesses and organizations. And I raise this because what has come up this time around is in terms of whether or not the disbursements will be different. Will the promises be different? And will the promises be kept? And even our own country, United States, we have not completely fulfilled our promise. One of the promises that we made was a brand new $100 million hospital for Port-au-Prince. I can tell you that 11 years after that earthquake, that hospital still has not opened its doors. It is still not ready. We also had the $300 million Caracol Industrial Park. And while we did see that park open, and it has provided roughly about 15,000 jobs, it has been a struggle because what you've seen is sort of an absence of the commitment that was there originally. So my opening remarks are just sort of looking at the role of the international community has played, and then we can continue this conversation. But I think this is the context in which this current disaster, the current challenges are being met in some of the discussions that I've heard from people on the ground in terms of where do we need to go or what we need to do differently. Thank you.
Thanks. That's very sobering. Thanks so much. Ambassador White.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Hi, Dan. Great to see you, my friends, Jackie and Danielle. Great to see you both also. Very interesting what Jackie had to say, because my first note that I was going to say is please, this time don't overpromise. And I think that's what we did after the quake in 2010. Everything was going to be rosy. I must have gone before the Congress 5 or 10 or 20 times, and they kept saying, why haven't you done this and why haven't you done that, and on and on and on. And, Haiti's not functioning perfectly. And I said, listen, the United States government pledged about $2.2 billion after the quake the hurricane in New Orleans, Katrina. They initially got $42 billion, and then they got an additional $8 billion, and they weren't rebuilt. And that was a city. They did not have 316,000 people die in 35 seconds. to really rebuild Haiti better, build back better. They kept saying Bill Clinton and everybody else over and over and over, would have taken so much more money that was pledged. It was about $13.3 billion pledged at the UN. I think we saw maybe half of that, and how much of that money actually got into the hands of the right people is difficult to say. There was a tremendous effort on the ground, Rubble was taken care of, clinics were established, schools were established, makeover, a lot of it, millions of people in tents, all of that cost a tremendous amount of money. And from when we got over sort of the recovery, the initial recovery stage, doing long-term development was very difficult to know how to go forward. And I do think we overpromised. I also think that the international community, and I've learned this, I learned it kind of later in my career, but I learned it because it's a tough lesson to learn. And that is only Haitians or Liberians or Malians or Tanzanians or whatever can really map a way forward. And the more we get in the middle of that muckety muck, the more we muck it up. And if we don't understand the history, the culture, the good guys, the bad guys, what role the private sector plays, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad, the intellectual side, how the downside, the dark side, the drug dealers, the gang members, the kidnappers, how that all has a part to play, and how we are going to listen to how Haiti charts a new way forward. And I think that was really missing. I remember talking to the leaders in the U.S. government before I went down as ambassador, and they said, well, here's the plan. And I said, well, it's a great plan, but it's going to take 20 years. And they're like, no, we only have 4. So we only had 4 years to do, in my opinion, a 20-year plan, and we had enough money to do maybe a quarter of it. So my advice is, please don't overpromise again, because it just disappoints everybody, and everyone is going to once again point fingers that we said we would do X, Y, Z, and unless we have the money to back it up, we're not going to do X, Y, Z, and we don't have a lot of new money going into Haiti. Ambassador Powers was down there and promised an additional $32 million for the earthquake recovery in the South. But that, again, is not going to be a hell of a lot of money when you talk about what is needed in a rather isolated area. So I also think we should be realistic, that we should focus and match realistic goals to, in fact, what money we know is coming in. We don't give money normally around the world to governments because the governments have very shaky financial systems. We don't trust them, quite frankly. We don't know where the money will go once it's in the coffer. So we tend to give money to NGOs. I believe that the U.S. government, if I were queen, I would try to be so much more creative in how we could get money in the hands of Haitian NGOs that we find do really good work, and base how we give the money on their results and not how great their personnel systems are, which they often are non-existent. And one last word, and that is, we keep saying in the U.S., but no one believes it, but I believe it, that elections do not make a democracy. And all over the world, we did it in Haiti. I was there when Baby Doc was taken out at midnight. And 3 days later, the U.S. government said, we're going to have an election in Haiti. And I was a junior nothing officer. But even then, I said, but Mr. Ambassador, he was a good ambassador, really, how we can have elections in Haiti when we have none of the democratic institutions required to have elections? We don't have political parties. We don't have an active civil society. We don't have a judicial system, and on and on and on. And he said the Haitian people want elections. And in my opinion, although once again, let's ask the Haitians, is Haitians want their voices heard. That's what democracy means. They want to be listened to. So I think we have to be careful on charting a way forward that is very much what the Haitian people want and not what we want.
Ambassador St. Lo, thank you for being here.
Yes, my first word is really to thank the organizers, specifically you, Dan, for this gathering, this conversation, and to be able to be part of this conversation with these talented panelists. And I am right now in the Southwest, one of the devastated area, in the Southwest. I was there 4 years ago after Matthew. It's like, hey, every time you have to come back and to deal with disasters, and we're going to have more disasters. We're going to have more violent disasters, and we know about it. And it's not a curse, and it's about our geographic position, but also about our vulnerability. And our vulnerability because of a fail of a collapse state. We have to be clear about it. We have a collapse state. And it's the result of an ongoing systemic crisis. So we have to approach Haiti challenges, and now we can even say threats, in a systemic way. And we should raise the question of the transformation of the whole system. Otherwise, we will be back in 3 months, 4 years again, telling the same thing. And we have learned so much after the earthquake, and we should, both the US and Haiti, learn from our experiences. But I really think that we should work on 3 tracks simultaneously. Otherwise, we will be always in a relief momentum. So while addressing the relief, and we have organization, we have faith-based organization, we have government institution to be reinforced, but I really think that the US faith-based organization and secular partners with local grassroots, because they are linked, they work together, they pray together. And we should really be able to reinforce their capacity to have immediate response while addressing a major immediate issue, which is security. And only a smart military cooperation, I'm not saying invasion, I'm saying cooperation, can help us out the rule of law for order and security in Haiti. And this way, with smart cooperation, with intelligence, we will be able to reinforce our army and our police force. An army, we don't have any enemies. We are not at war. So our army should be there to protect our territory against earthquake, against all what we have been, the ones that are attacking us, that are our enemies now. And we need to really work on the immediate security issue that with the neighborhoods, the gangs, all this should be addressed with military cooperation. So I really think that the US, and I think that CSIS is setting the way, having new voices. The US government should have new segment of Haitian society at the table, mostly women and the youth. And it's not a way to exclude the old actors, the old boys. It's a way to have everybody at the table. And everybody at the table, you will change the menu. And we will be able to together to reinforce our government that we know that is weak, but we should reinforce both civil society and government. And the best way to reinforce government, it's to help political party become stronger. It's to see how we can regroup in 4 or 5 political parties, the hundreds of political parties that we have. Because when I see the northern country, the US, politics is done, it's managed by parties. In the DR, in our neighborhood Caribbean country, we should adhere to the Caribbean, standards. So I think many groups are collaborating. Many people are collaborating. That's the first time that I see people collaborating together in different groups. We will never be one voice, like you in the US. We will never be one group. But it's very good to see what is emerging right now in face of adversity. So the US should find ways to support those collaborative efforts. And we need think tank like CSIS. We need the militaries. We need whatever institutions that are strong in the US to work with us so that we can really move forward and address this systemic, crisis.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ms. Charles, can I get your reaction to some of the things that have been put on the table? I thought some of your scene-setting comments were very sobering. I'd welcome your reaction to some of the things that Ambassador White, Ambassador St. Lo put on the table.
Well, let me start with Ambassador White. I mean, I think she hit a lot of it on the head in terms of the overpromise. And, what happens in these promises is that there's this promise, and then there is this, I don't believe that the government can do this, or, I don't believe that this is going to happen. So what you see in terms of the disbursement, that it's either the same players or it's money that goes back to the Beltway. And we see that there's not a lot of regard that is given to Haitian NGOs. And I remember after 2010 writing a story about that, and saying, that a lot of NGOs on the ground thought that they were going to have access to a lot of these funds. And I remember talking to Bill Clinton about this, and he was very frustrated by it because the way the mechanism was set up, and the US was also pushing this narrative of, no, we need to give it to people who we trust or people that we know. And if you look at our own programs in the US government, in terms of some of the reconstruction, they were also riddled with problems. There were corruption issues that were raised. There were questions about, why did this, housing project that was just built basically fell apart, weeks and months later. I will tell you, one of the things that I am seeing different this time around, having been on the ground, is that whereas after 2010, especially from the US, it was this our way or the highway, and forcing solutions, forcing decisions on the Haitian government at the time. This go around, when the US is saying, we are taking our directive from the local authorities, from the Haitian government, I do see this. And I will give you two examples. In 2010, I was shadowing President Rene Preval at the time, was spending the day with him. And he asked for the tents, 20,000 tents. He wanted tents. And the U.S. Envoy at the time literally laughed in his face, and they're like, no, we're not going to give you tents. We need to get the economy going. We need to let people to start to rebuild. And he saw ahead. He saw that if you allow people to start to rebuild, you're going to have these tent cities, these makeshift tents, these camps. And that's exactly what ended up happening. And then we saw when President Martelly came in, the challenges there of trying to remove those camps. This time around, you had a government that was saying, okay, we don't want those tent cities. But I think people lost sight of how those tent cities happened. It wasn't because Haitians got tents and tarps. It was because they were allowed to rebuild. And we had the U.S. government telling the Haitian government, you have to provide land for housing that never arrived because of the whole land issues and things like that. So people found that loophole that escaped. So the transitional housing that were supposed to, come after the tent cities, and then they were supposed to be the step before permanent housing. Well, there are people today who are still living in transitional housing. So when they talk about lessons learned, I am seeing that there are some lessons learned, but the question is, again, are we going to see the commitment? It's not just about the money, but the commitment from the international community. I would joke at times, like, we're treating the international treat Haiti or Haitian officials as if they're teenagers when in fact they're toddlers, right? On certain projects. It's like, oh, no, we're going to let them decide. Well, let them decide means that you have a $300 million industrial park called Caracol, and you do not have a port to support this park. And so while you have 15,000 jobs, you have your investors there that are slowly moving across the border to the Dominican Republic because of all of the instability, the fuel issues, the gang issues, the security, all of these things. So I think this time around, the international community really has to take it all the way. If you're going to commit to a project, it has to be all the way. Along with, Ambassador St. Lo, one of the things I'm hearing from her, and that has been one of the frustrations, is civil society and the lack of civil society in the discussion. And, anybody that looks at, diplomacy closely and looks at foreign relations, what you will see is that, like the wind, the relationship that embassies or governments have with the local actors on the ground a lot of times it's personality driven or policy driven of what's coming out of those capitals. And so the frustration for Haitian civil society for a long time is after years of being supported by the U.S. and being strengthened by the U.S. And the last couple of years, they felt that they were basically pushed to the sides and their voices were not heard. And so what you're saying today is today you have a country that's in crisis. We all know what the problems are. We all know where you're going to have the political games to try to destabilize and what have you. But make the extra effort to find the players, the organizations on the ground that can help move this conversation forward. Not everybody's corrupt. It's not, it's not a hopeless situation. That if you make that particular effort, we can find a way to move forward. And I think, just to quote, a special envoy Dan Foote said last week on another panel, like, everybody doesn't need to be at the table. Everybody's not going to come at the table. And then finally, I'll just say this, Ambassador St. Lo talked about political parties, but I think as Haitians, we also have to take responsibility for the disaster. The fact that we have over 100 political parties, that was not something that was dictated by the international community. That was something that was created by Haitians in a so-called political agreement or coalition. And so while it may have been easy to create 100 plus political parties, where is there political will today to remove those parties and to go back to maybe 4 or 5 parties? That we have to stop looking for those doors, those exit doors, because there are people who benefit off of the dysfunction. And I think that while people are talking today, for me, the proof is in the pudding, and that proof is whether or not the talk is going to result into actions and whether the players on the ground are going to be willing to give up something in order to achieve something else. And that, to me, is the real test of Haiti at this particular time in its history.
Okay, great. Ambassador White, would you want to add anything?
Yeah, I do think that to talk about any intervention, any what an outsider is supposed to do about Haiti, it's just got a false narrative in some ways if we cannot talk about the security in the country. Kidnappings are going bananas, murders are off the charts. Corruption is everywhere in the private sector, in the government sector. There are more. I deeply believe there are more honest people than there are corrupt people, but the corrupt people tend to be in positions of power, and we kind of have to change that narrative somehow. And we don't seem to be able to do it. Not only do we not seem to be able to do it, but we seem to support, even when we know people are corrupt and stealing things and money and whatever. I mean, the people that really always benefit off a disaster in Haiti is the private sector. They have all the land, they have all the car rentals, they have all the apartments. After the earthquake, apartments that used to go for $500 a month were at $7,000 a month, and no one blinked an eye. And I don't know how to get at it, but we kind of have to get at it. You have to get at the situation that we've got 60% of the country controlled by gangs. And I think we ought to be very creative here. Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles has done some fantastic work with gangs. Let's stop giving money to places that don't know shit from Shinola. I hope no kids are watching about what's going on.
That's a think tank term that works, Ambassador.
And start giving money to people who actually have had long time experience. And if we can get people of Haitian descent to come down and help, that 10 times better. And lastly, don't be fooled. The United States of America's budget for 2021 to Haiti is around $200 million. Of that $200 million, and this is not going to change. We got an additional $32 million for the earthquake, fine, but there's $200 million. Congress cuts that up. Congress says you're going to spend this much on health and this much on education and this much on whatever. And the big chunk of that money, because this is what we do best, and this is what Congress authorizes, is health. Women and child health, maternal and child health, HIV/AIDS, basic health services. And so, if anyone thinks, we're going to build new houses for everyone in the South, we're not. And that's what I keep saying. You've got to be realistic about what it is the United States government is going to do in Haiti. And they should be very vocal and very specific about what our interventions are going to do. In the short term, we will be there with sheets. We will be there with shelter repair kits. We will be there with emergency food. But we are not, in the long term, as far as I can tell by reading the documents that I have on hand, we're not going to rebuild the South. So don't expect that. And last but not least, I do think that the Haitian government, I'm not even sure who that is. I know there's a bunch of ministers. Many people say that Henri is not a legitimate prime minister. I mean, he's what we got, but I don't know if we don't seem to, or the Haitian people don't need to move quickly to establish some kind of a government in order that it can move forward with the international world. And I also think that the role of the diaspora is not being used or played. They talk big, but they don't move big. And I wonder if we can't get that to move and shake a little bit better in order to help the Haitian people.
Great. Ambassador St. Lo, would you like to respond to anything that's been put on the table?
Yes, I just like to reinforce that we need to set a new table and have other voices at the table. When you take the diaspora, we have Haitians that are managing New York City budget. We have Haitians that are leading US think tank. We have so many talented and committed Haitians. You know, they will sit down at any board, at any table when it comes to help Haiti progress. So that's why I think the US has to be very selective about who's going to be around the table. And as I said, not excluding anyone, but we need to have a new table, set another table.
Okay, I've got lots of questions. Let me put a couple of my own out there. In theory, there are going to be some elections potentially in Haiti. What do people think about that? Is that a good idea? That's one question. I think another question I'd like to put to this group is gang. The gang, there's a significant amount of gang experience, not just in the United States. We have gang problems in this country, but I'm thinking about in the Northern Triangle. Are there some lessons to be learned from some of the experiences in the Northern Triangle? So does anyone want to kind of take on the issue of sort of elections? And does someone want to take on the issue of sort of like lessons learned, not just from US, because we have a problem with gangs, but are there other parts of the region, and I'm thinking of Central America, where there may be some lessons learned? Any of you want to take those two topics on?
Let me just say about the gang issue and the lessons learned. And when I talk to experts on Haiti, this is something that they bring up over and over again, is that Haiti is not Central America. Haiti is not Africa. As a matter of fact, there's a former special envoy who said Haiti is the only country where there has been multiple U.S. invasions and they don't play baseball. And what it is to say is that Haiti moves to its own beat. And I think that when you're looking at an issue like the gang situation in Haiti, you first need to understand, where is this from? What is the engine behind it? Who are the players that are involved? Is this about kids looking for association? Is it about cops who can't get, make it off of a police salary? I don't really think that there's been an effort on the part of some of the players in the international community to really understand what is driving the gang issue in Haiti. And I have to tell you that this is like a fairly new issue, a fairly new phenomenon. As somebody who covers the Caribbean, I mean, one of the things that I always, appreciated the fact was that in Haiti, I didn't have to deal with the gang problems that I had to deal with in Jamaica. It wasn't like I turned a corner and I'm going to go into a police shootout with gangs. And today in Haiti, the gang insecurity is the biggest issue because the whole country has been reduced to a very tiny, small space. And you're wondering how long before my space gets invaded by this insecurity. So in order for us to address the gang problems in Haiti, you have to first understand the root of that problem, what is driving the problem, and then you have to come up with a package of response that addresses the Haiti situation unique. We have to stop trying to take these sort of one-size-fits-all programs that we've done elsewhere and try to apply it to Haiti. And finally, I'll say, and the programs that you have had, I remember years ago we had stuff like Viva Rio that was invested. They were in these communities. communities. And then what happened? International community stopped providing the funding and then it disappeared. I mean, that's been the repetitive story with Haiti over and over again. International community either brings Cadillac programs to this country, and then when the funding dries up, they can't continue those programs, or they don't let the programs work long enough so that they can see the results. So today, given that this is the most major challenge, I think there has to be a serious commitment on a part of everybody that they're going to try to address it. And it can't just be based on the Haitian police force, because you have to understand today that you have a police force that is basically imploding. And there are a number of issues that are impacting that force. And these are not going to be the guys that are just going to go and stick their neck out with gang, leaders for the status quo. We have to be creative, but we have to be decisive, and it has to be based on research and not pulling things out of the air.
Someone want to take on the issue of elections?
For me, the election and the gang security, it's the same problem, let's say. We cannot have election if there is no security. And there is kind of insecurity because of power struggle. So yes, we have problem in the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are poor, and this can be addressed in a long term, in a systemic way, the way I was saying. But it's a struggle for power. So how can we have election? How can even women be candidates with this situation? So we need to take some time, and we are already in a transition, have a 2-year transition, so that we can really solve this problem. And the same way that the relief is an emergency, it's urgent in the Southwest, the security in the gang neighborhood, it's a top priority. It's urgent. We can't wait because people are suffering. It's about rape. It's about people. There are ordinary people living in those neighborhoods. The country, the South, is blocked because they can't sell their products, their crops to Port-au-Prince. It's social, it's economic, it's psychological, and it's a war of nerves on everybody. So, and as I said, we need a military cooperation to solve this problem. And this way, we can get ready for free elections. And we have to be careful. What can be done, maybe what has been successful in Central America. We are not Central America, as Jacqueline was saying. And we have to be careful. And that's why it's important to have Haitian from the diaspora, Haitian in Haiti, to hear their voice, have them think, because they know how to think, because they think in your think tank. So they can think about Haiti. And let me give you a simple example. The US has put a travel warning, number 4 on Haiti for COVID-19. But it's not our top priority. It's not our top challenge. And it's not the same case as other countries. We have lost a lot of people. We have lost many people in the diaspora. But most people that are dying in Haiti are people of my age. But there is only 5% of the population that is my age. So we need really to be able to really think out of the box and really plan with Haitian people thinking local, and also hear from people at local level so we can find a solution. We are not a violent country. Haitians are not violent people. And what we are having, I can say it's kind of mutation of a society that has to evolve and can't find its way. So that's why the collaborative effort that we are having now of youth, of the Protestant churches, of civil society, of even the political parties, support them in their thinking, and have Haitians from abroad coming, and they are already involved in all these talks. I've never seen so many talks in Haiti about, and we have one common denominator, is Haiti. And this should put us in a position to be able to find solutions. We're not going to find one solution, but we're going to find solutions. And the US also should be able to sit with our common partners. We know our allies. We know them. We know the ones that are bad, the ones that are good. We should be able together to have a sincere conversation
I think
and say, okay, let's plan.
Yes, sorry, Daniel.
Ambassador White.
Yeah, I think this constant, elections, election, it's just the wrong question. Elections are complicated in Haiti. The CEP is not viewed as legitimate by, I would say, 80% of the Haitians. The Supreme Court is not considered legitimate by the Haitian society. You can't keep pushing elections in an atmosphere of chaos. It doesn't, the outcome is not good. I mean, Moïse was elected because the United States of America and the others in the core group said, this has got to happen. It's going to happen whether you like it or not, and it's going to happen now. And so in the end, 20% of the Haitian population turned out, and half of them voted for him. So he took over office with 10%, of the population saying, yes, we consider you a legitimate president. That is not a recipe for governance. So we need to be the facilitators or however we can do it to make sure that all these groups, the youth and the women, and we do not do this well, but it can be done, support them, get them meeting places, give them the money to organize campaigns or talking points or bigger gatherings. Let's try to work with the people on the ground and not push grandiose ideas, but ideas that stem from the ground up. And many of them have excellent agendas. But I remember when I was ambassador, Danielle, I was trying to get her, I think it was like $10,000. And I mean, over and over and over, it was like, and she could have used it, immediately to empower women voters and women candidates. Could not get the United States government to find a way of how you could support a women's organization that was trying to organize women. She didn't have the right financial, 400 accountants or whatever. And this has just got to change.
Okay. I've got some interesting questions. So several questions from the audience. The presentation of the new draft constitution was completed over the weekend. How do each of the panelists see this impacting the overall stability of the country over the next 6 months, knowing the hurricane season is not over and there are still enormous needs? That's one question. Another question is, and you can pick from these, a lack of a sense of a commonwealth cripples the Haitian political elite in dealing with national/domestic issues. How can the international community help grow that vital aspect of governance? And then there's a question from IREX. As someone who works at a large international NGO and works directly with Haitians as part of my program, we run a yearly fellowship that brings young entrepreneurs to the U.S. from all over the Americas for business training. How can I best use my voice and position to advocate for our Haitian fellows through these challenges? So these are the three questions. You can kind of pick and choose. Let me start with you, Ms. Charles, please.
Let me just say, in terms of the Constitution, the debate for the last 2 years was not about whether or not Haiti needed a new constitution or whether Haiti needed reforms of the Constitution. It was the vehicle by which the late president chose to get there. That is where the resistance was, and that is what created all of these problems. And you already had an effort that was taking place in the lower chamber of deputies to address some of the irritants within this constitution or some of the changes. And what we saw in the end was that was not even considered, and this new document was written who knows where by a group of individuals, who knows whom. So right there, you had a document that was coming out that suffered from legitimacy. Today, we are hearing that, this Constitution was delivered, but I understand that in this accord, that the Prime Minister has signed. There's some talk about Constituent Assembly. Clearly we've seen the results of the problems that exist in the Constitution, where today you had a president who was assassinated, and you have a country where all of the institutions are non-existent. They've collapsed, and then there's this sort of political vacuum. But are we going to be able to find a formula that will allow for there to be adjustments to the Constitution? How long is that going to take? And are you going to find the support on the part of a country like the U.S. that, despite what Ambassador Pam White says, is all about elections? What we kept hearing from the State Department was that we've said that, the Constitution should not negate, they wanted elections over Constitution reform, but in all those rooms, everybody's saying there are problems in its Constitution. So I think that's going to be a huge challenge today, right? And even among the opposition and others, you hear them keep saying new constitutional changes. But again, are Haitians today willing to give something up in order to get something? Because again, the things that are wrong that feed into the dysfunction and feeds into the problem, there are people who always benefit from that. And I say again that for me, the real test of Haiti at this moment, when they talk about Haiti solutions for Haiti challenges, is whether or not the Haitians on the ground are going to be willing to make that sacrifice in order for you to get this country in a way where we can see institutions that are strengthened, that are independent, and that regardless of who may be president or whatever issues there are, you trust in those institutions to tackle and to take on those problems, and you're not always looking for the international community to come and have my back.
I agree 1,000% with everything she just said. I mean, I'm saying that I don't think elections make a democracy. This is not U.S. government policy. I'm not in any way, anything that I state has nothing to do with U.S. government policy, believe me.
But Ambassador White, how about some of these questions about either a Commonwealth or in terms of how should somebody like IREX be supporting the voices in Haiti?
Yeah, it's interesting. My daughter-in-law works at IREX. Anyway, and she's great. But I just don't know enough about what's going on the ground. I mean, we do have a robust DG program through USAID. I mean, our first big chunk of money is spent on health. Second big chunk of money is disaster preparation and reaction to disasters. And the third is about $17 million a year on governance programs. But I do not know how, in fact, now, how those programs actually are implemented on the ground. And I think it's very, very, very difficult to implement anything with governance in a country that is on the verge of collapse. I just read something that the UN wrote about the judiciary that is pretty much non-functional. And that's, a big part of how you make any government function, and how you put even people in power with no judicial system to make sure that the wheels turn round and round in any kind of honest manner. I don't know. It's a huge question. But I think the first thing we have to do is make sure that the Haitian people's voices, they've been demonstrating and they've been in the streets now for years. And we got to talk to the gangs, and we got to talk to the protesters, and we got to talk to the opposition, and we got to do it so that in an organized manner, so that something rather than nothing comes out of all this. And without doing that first, without laying some of the groundwork down, I just don't see any possibility. We can't keep doing the same damn thing we've been doing over the last 50 years and expect something different to come out.
Ambassador St. Lo, I'd welcome your thoughts about some of the things that we put on the table.
Myself, I don't understand why the international community, mostly the UN and the OAS, are pushing for the Constitution. First, we need to respect this Constitution. And the Constitution, it's written how you can change the Constitution. And you change it right now. Are we going to respect it? Why should we respect it if we haven't done it for so many years? That's why I'm talking about this systemic crisis. We have to be serious about it. Especially that we have a very young population that is ready to follow. 75% of the population is less than 35 years old. So my generation can't be kidnapping the country like that, you know? And I think it's a very Latin way of doing things. You see what I mean? We have to be more Anglo-Saxon in a certain way. We have a constitution that is in French. People have voted a constitution that they didn't understand. And now you have all those big debates. We know that it has to be changed. And the constitution also asks for a constitutional council. That should have been this job. So why we didn't put a constitutional council? And I think that's those things that we have to address for my generation, that we're always mixing, we are confused in everything that we are doing, and we do it on purpose for our own agenda. So now I think that's why we need to have new players at the diaspora, talented Haitians from the diaspora, you know, with the youth, so that we can come up with solutions through a dialogue, to whatever way we want to sit down. But I also think that elections are key for that. The Constitution can be an a debate for election. You see what I mean? We can take these 2 years to discuss about a new constitution, but we should have a new parliament in place to work on the constitutional reform. We should put together, as soon as elections are done in 2 years, we should put together, follow the constitution that we have now, respect it, finally, and put together the constitutional court. All the institutions or structures are there in the Constitution. As I said, it must be reformed, changed, but let's start respecting what's there right now.
Great. Okay. So I have a question here about COVID-19. We haven't talked a lot about COVID-19, but COVID-19 vaccinations require that people operate on the ground. There's a high level of insecurity, the estimates of 60% of the country under gang control, in quotes. How can the international community support vaccinations in times of COVID at a time when there's sort of security challenges in Haiti, and specifically in the region of the Southern Peninsula?
Well, you know, COVID vaccines, 500,000 doses were given by the Biden administration, you know, in July, and they were welcomed by Haiti. It was the last country in the Americas to receive vaccines. But there's been no money for campaigns, for outreach, all the things that you need to convince people in a country that they should get vaccinated. I mean, we are dealing with COVID hesitancy here in the US, but imagine being in a country where you have not seen the amount of cases that other countries have seen. People don't believe that either the disease isn't real, although they're more and more are starting to, but they don't trust the government that is entrusted with rolling this out. Like there are issues. When you talk to NGOs on the ground, this is one of the things that they raise, the fact that they cannot get money for COVID vaccination campaigns in order to get these shots in people's arms. And I will tell you, in my own individual conversations with people that I know, whether it's my family members in Haiti or people I just meet on the street and I talk to, what I realize is that it's, you know, if they haven't taken a vaccine, it's because it's a lack of information or they're not sure. And all it requires sometimes is a conversation with somebody and says, well, you know, I took it. Here's what happened, or here's why you should. I mean, there are people you're not going to be able to convince them at all. But today there really is not any sort of campaign going on, and you have a government that is cash strapped, that is broke, that doesn't have any money, and they have all of these, you know, other challenges. And let's stop fooling ourselves. Even just in terms of regular vaccinations, it's a challenge in this country. And now you want them to do COVID vaccines, which are important. But if you want to move those vaccines and not have them go to waste and not wait till we have the Delta variant or some other variant to come to Haiti and really wreak havoc, I think that the international community has to rethink this and says, what more can they do to assist Haiti beyond just sending doses of vaccine to the country?
Yeah, I mean, I've had conversations about this with some of the top docs in Haiti, and I mean, they were the last to get them, but that's because they turned them away. several months ago because there were no COVID cases. They thought they might be lucky and dodge the bullet, but of course that's not going to happen. And we were talking about, the United States of America has spent billions in establishing health networks through the HIV/AIDS money, the PEPFAR money. And so the distribution systems of actually getting the vaccines where they need to go, especially the 500,000, which is the easy part. It's not, because we can do that in urban areas, which are relatively easy to penetrate. And we have a higher, which it's not high, but it's higher ratio of health professionals to the population. But, getting it down where it needs to go, that's a whole nother question. And they're going to need more than 500,000 doses. They're going to need absolutely money in order to spread this out into the rural areas. So there's no doubt it's just another challenge that's difficult to figure out a solution to. But also probably will not see the death rates that we've seen in countries like ours because the population is so much younger. As Danielle was saying, only 5% of the population in Haiti is over 69 or something. So they're relatively a very young population. And I do keep saying that is one of the 3 or 4 top challenges in Haiti. If it's not running wild through the country today, it's going to be running wild tomorrow. But there's lots of challenges down there. You have to prioritize.
Okay, so lots of challenges here. I want to give you each a minute in terms of what's the one message for the Biden-Harris administration? What's the one message for institutions like the IDB or the OAS or Friends in Canada? What do you got? What's your one takeaway message? I'd start with you, Ambassador White.
I think my number one message is it's going to be tough to make any progress in Haiti, whether it's in the Southwest or it's in Port-au-Prince or it's nationally, if we don't get a handle on the chaos, the violence, the gangs, the total absence of authorities in any of the sectors. And that we need to get together with the Haitians and come up with a better, more realistic cost. Do not promise the moon. This is how much money we got. This is what we can do. Make sure that there's a Haitian people and especially diaspora. I'm desperate to get them involved. They are super smart and super dedicated. They talk a lot. Now the time to move. To make Haiti a better place. And we've got to start vocalizing these are the 4 or 5 things that we can do right now within the next year, the next 2 years. I don't want to talk about the next 50 years or 10 years or even 5 years. Let's see what we can do to right this ship immediately.
Okay, Ms. Charles, I'd welcome your what's your message, takeaway message?
I think I want to build on it. I mean, one of the frustrations for me as a journalist who covers Haiti is that when you look, you don't see an example, whether it is a project or a town where you see, from A to Z, the commitment of the international community in terms of funding. You can't say here's this town and the kids have a better education scores because this investment was made in education. People are healthier because this investment was made, in health. Like we're always trying to invent the wheel in Haiti when you don't need to. I think it was Ambassador White says, find some areas that you want. Let's just take, for instance, the General Hospital. And this is actually a real story. Okay. One of the projects or the planning discussions was we have this hospital, we are investing over $100 million, France and Haiti. When you look in the diaspora, places like Miami, Florida, you have all of these Haitian Americans who are in the healthcare sector, from nurses to nurses aid to doctors to surgeons. Why can't this hospital, along with being a teaching hospital, also be a place where you can have the diaspora be involved in the running, and we run it differently and it be an example? But somewhere along the way, somebody lacked the courage to push that forward. The international community wields a tremendous amount of power in Haiti. or on Haitian issues, but it doesn't know when to use it or always uses it badly. I will challenge them to be much more creative, to think out of the box, and let's just stop trying to do 50 things. Let's find a few things that work and be courageous and just do it. So at the end of the day, you have that example, you have it's done, and then you can and you recreate that in other sectors.
Ambassador St. Clair, I'll give you the last word. What is the message for the international community? What's our takeaway? What are some actions we can take?
Yes, the message is clear. We need to work on 3 tracks while working on relief, emergency, same time, build resilience. Because while we are in the South, okay, but what about the North? So the North will suffer from what's going down. So we need to build the resilience of the rest of the country and create wealth wherever we can create wealth. So we definitely need to work on the 3 track. Otherwise, we will miss the point. And I think the US can play a key role as our closest partner, our strongest partner, is to have other partners to sit at the table, one table, and so that we can have come up with a plan, a 3-track plan.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. This has been great. Really appreciate y'all taking the time to be with us today. We need to end it here. This has been excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep on, ladies.